This is not, incidentally, necessarily any kind of somber endeavor, nor are the after-death environments somber at all. To the contrary, they are generally far more intense and joyful than the reality you know now. You will simply be learning to operate in a new environment in which different laws apply, and the laws are far less limiting than the physical ones with which you now operate. In other words, you must learn to understand and use new freedoms. Even these experiences will vary, however, and even this state is a state of becoming, for many will continue into other physical lives. Some will exist and develop their abilities in different systems of reality altogether, and so for a time will remain in this intermediary state. For those of you who are lazy, I can offer no hope. Death will not bring you an eternal resting place. You may rest, if this is your wish, for a while. Not only must you use your abilities after death, however, but you must face up to yourself for those that you did not use during your previous existence. Those of you who had faith in life after death will find it much easier to accustom yourself to the new conditions. Those of you who do not have such faith may gain it in a different way by following through in the exercises I will give you later in this book, for these will enable you to extend your perceptions to these other levels of reality if you are persistent, expectant, and determined. Now, consciousness as you know it is used to these brief gaps of physical non-existence mentioned earlier. Longer gaps disorient it to varying degrees, but these are not unusual. When the physical body sleeps, consciousness often leaves the physical system for fairly long periods in your terms. But because the consciousness is not in the normal physical awake state, it is not aware of these gaps and is relatively unconcerned. If consciousness vacated the body for the same amount of time from a normal physically awake state, it would consider itself dead, for it could not rationalize the gap of dimension and experience. Therefore, in the sleep state, each of you have undergone, to some degree, the same kind of absence of consciousness from physical reality that you experience during death. In these cases, you return to the body but have passed over the threshold into these other existences many, many times, so it will not be as unfamiliar to you as you may now suppose. Dream recall experiments and other mental disciplines to be mentioned later will make these points quite clear to all of you who embark upon the suggested exercises. Now, you may or may not be greeted by friends or relatives immediately following death. This is a personal matter, as always. Overall, you may be far more interested in people that you have known in past lives than those close to you in the present one, for example. Your true feeling towards relatives who are also dead will be known to you and to them. There is no hypocrisy. You do not pretend to love a parent who did little to earn your respect or love. Telepathy operates without distortion in the after-death period, so you must deal with the true relationships that exist between yourself and all relatives and friends who await you. You may find that someone you considered merely an enemy actually deserved your love and respect, for example, and you will then treat him accordingly. Your own motives will be crystal clear. You will react to this clearness, however, in your own way. You will not be automatically wise if you were not so before, but neither will there be a way to hide from your own feelings, emotions, or motives. Whether or not you accept inferior motives in yourself or learn from them is still up to you. The opportunities for growth and development are very rich, however, and the learning methods at your disposal very effective. You examine the fabric of the existence you have left, and you learn to understand how your experiences were the result of your own thoughts and emotions, and how these affected others. Until this examination is through, you are not yet aware of the larger portion of your own identity. When you realize the significance and meaning of the life you have just left, then you are ready for conscious knowledge of your other existences. You become aware then of an expanded awareness. What you are begins to include what you have been in other lives, and you begin to make plans for your next physical existence if you decide upon one. You can instead enter another level of reality and then return to a physical existence if you choose. Your consciousness, as you think of it, may of course leave your body entirely before physical death. As mentioned earlier, there is no precise point of death, but I am speaking as if there was for the sake of your convenience. Your consciousness leaves the physical organism in various ways according to the conditions. In some cases, the organism itself is still able to function to some degree, although without the leadership or organization that existed previously. The simple consciousness of atoms, cells, and organs continues to exist after the main consciousness has left for some time. There may or may not be disorientation on your part according to your beliefs and development. Now, I do not necessarily mean intellectual development. The intellect should go hand in hand with the emotions and intuitions, but if it pulls against these two strongly, difficulties can arise when the newly freed consciousness seizes upon its ideas about reality after death, rather than facing the particular reality in which it finds itself. It can deny feeling, in other words, and even attempt to argue itself out of its present independence from the body. Again, as mentioned earlier, an individual can be so certain that death is the end of all that oblivion, though temporary, results. In many cases, immediately on leaving the body, there is, of course, amazement and recognition of the situation. The body itself may be viewed, for example, and many funerals have a guest of honor amidst the company, and no one gazes into the face of the corpse with as much curiosity and wonder. At this point, many variations in behavior emerge, each the result of individual background, knowledge, and habit. The surroundings in which the dead find themselves will often vary. Vivid hallucinations may form experience quite as real as any immortal life. Now, I have told you that thoughts and emotions form physical reality, and they form after-death experience. This does not mean that the experiences are not valid any more than it means that physical life is not valid. Certain images have been used to symbolize such a transition from one existence to another, and many of these are extremely valuable in that they provide a framework with understandable references. The crossing of the river Styx is such a one. The dying expected certain procedures to occur in a more or less orderly fashion. The maps were known beforehand. At death, the consciousness hallucinated the river vividly. Relatives and friends already dead entered into the ritual, which was a profound ceremony also on their parts. The river was as real as any that you know, as treacherous to a traveler alone without proper knowledge. Guides were always at the river to help such travelers across. It is not due to say that such a river is an illusion. The symbol is reality, you see. The way was planned. Now, that particular map is no longer generally in use. The living do not know how to read it. Christianity has believed in a heaven and a hell, a purgatory and reckoning, and so at death, to those who so believe in these symbols, another ceremony is enacted, and the guides take on the guises of those beloved figures of Christian saints and heroes. Then within this as a framework, and in terms that they can understand, such individuals are told the true situation. Mass religious movements have for centuries fulfilled that purpose, in giving man some plan to be followed. It little mattered that later the plan was seen as a child's primer, a book of instructions complete with colorful tales, for the main purpose was served, and there was little disorientation. In periods where no such mass ideas are held, there is more disorientation, and when life after death is completely denied, the problem is somewhat magnified. Many, of course, are overjoyed to find themselves still conscious. Others have to learn all over again about certain laws of behavior, for they do not realize the creative potency of their thoughts or emotions. Such an individual may find himself in 10 different environments within the flicker of an eyelash, for example, with no idea of the reason behind the situation. He will see no continuity at all, and feel himself flung without rhyme or reason from one experience to another, never realizing that his own thoughts are propelling him quite literally. I am speaking now of the events immediately following death, for there are other stages. Guides will helpfully become a part of your hallucinations in order to help you out of them, but they must first of all get your trust. At one time, in your terms, I myself acted as such a guide, as in a sleep state Rupert now follows the same road. The situation is rather tricky from the guide's viewpoint, for psychologically utmost discretion must be used. One man's Moses, as I discovered, may not be another man's Moses. I have served as a rather credible Moses on several occasions, and once, though this is hard to believe, to an Arab. The Arab was a very interesting character, by the way, and to illustrate some of the difficulties involved, I will tell you about him. He hated the Jews, but somehow he was obsessed with the idea that Moses was more powerful than Allah, and for years this was the secret sin upon his conscience. He spent some time in Constantinople at the time of the Crusades. He was captured and ended up with a group of Turks, all to be executed by the Christians, in this case very horribly so. They forced his mouth open and stuffed it with burning coals as a starter. He cried to Allah, and then in greater desperation to Moses, and as his consciousness left his body, Moses was there. He believed in Moses more than he did Allah, and I did not know until the last moment which form I was to assume. He was a very likable chap, and under the circumstances I did not mind when he seemed to expect a battle for his soul. Moses and Allah were to fight for him. He cannot rid himself of the idea of force, though he had died by force, and nothing could persuade him to accept any kind of peace or contentment or any rest until some kind of battle was wrought. A friend and I, with some others, staged the ceremony, and from opposite clouds in the sky, Allah and I shouted out our claims upon his soul, while he, the poor man, cowered on the ground between us. Now, while I tell this story humorously, you must understand that the man's belief brought it about, and so to set him free, we worked it through. I called upon Jehovah, but to no avail, because our Arab did not know of Jehovah, only of Moses, and it was in Moses he put his faith. Allah drew a cosmic sword, and I set it afire so that he dropped it. It fell to the ground and set the land aflame. Our Arab cried out again. He saw leagues of followers behind Allah, and so leagues of followers appeared behind me. Our friend was convinced that one of the three of us must be destroyed, and he feared mightily that he would be the victim. Finally, the opposing clouds in which we appeared came closer. In my hand I held a tablet and said, "Thou shalt not kill." Allah beheld a sword. And as we came closer, we exchanged these items, and our followers merged. We came together, forming the image of a sun, and we said, "We are one." The two diametrically opposed ideas had to merge, or the man would have no peace, and only when these opposites were united could we begin his explanation.